Hi, everyone. It's Joanne Moffat, and I'm here today to talk with you about self-care. And this is in response to delivery of trauma-informed care. Now, the reason that we're doing this is because we work with kids who have experienced trauma. And as a result, we, as professionals, are doing what we call trauma-informed care. You've had a lot of training on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And now, in order to do this work, we need to be looking at what it means to be trauma-informed in the work that we do. I'd like you to notice that there are 3 R's on this page that are important for you to be focusing on: realizing, recognizing, and responding. Now, as professionals, we realize and we're aware of the prevalence of trauma in our population, and we recognize that it can affect behavior, emotions, learning, thinking, and physical states. Some of our kids come to school and they act tired, or they're not able to eat, they're lethargic, or they may move too much. So as professionals, we also recognize and are aware that trauma symptoms are normal reactions to abnormal situations. Think about that. We're recognizing that these trauma symptoms, these things that we see, remember, trauma is a verb and it's actions that we see, that these are normal reactions to abnormal situations. And as a result, we're going to respond, and we're going to respond with thoughtful, sensitive, and extremely intentional practice. As professionals, after we do the realizing, the recognizing, and the responding, we're going to seek to actively avoid re-traumatizing our students and families. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to be thoughtful, as we said before, and we're going to avoid situations that are going to make them re-experience that trauma feeling. So we're going to avoid isolating timeouts. We're going to be becoming those behavior detectives by being more aware of environmental triggers, such as loud noise. And we're going to keep doors open when we're meeting with students of trauma, when we're conferencing with them, so they don't feel closed in. And hopefully, in our waiting spaces for families, we're going to provide comfort so that they don't get re-traumatized as well. So, impacts of trauma on you. So before I get into that, I'd like to share with you this book. This is a good reference book if anyone wants to look at trauma on their own and do some more research. But this book, Trauma Stewardship, is written by, I always have to look at her name because it's long, Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. Now, she was a trauma worker, and she wrote this book. It's a guide for caring for self while caring for others. And let me just read you a little bit of her bio, which I find really interesting. So Laura worked directly with trauma survivors for over 2 decades. At 18, she regularly spent nights volunteering in a homeless shelter. From there, she went on to work with survivors of child abuse, domestic violence, acute trauma, and natural disasters. Simultaneously, she's been active in community organizing and movements for social and environmental justice. Like many of her colleagues, she initially engaged in her work with a great passion and commitment, and with a sense that it was a privilege to serve others. But over time, the work changed her until she was no longer the person she'd been. She felt a rising despair about the brutality of the world and anger at those who'd helped to create the conditions of trauma and suffering of humans, animals, and our planet. The work she cared so much about was taking a toll on her. Her work had compromised her ability to be present in her life, to enjoy her relationships, and even be an effective worker and educator. So she wrote a book, and she is just one person of many who have studied the impacts of trauma on professionals such as you. And I've noted here 4 different effects of trauma on you. And there's one more on another slide that we're going to look at in a minute. But the first is the contagion effect. And this is where your emotional response parallels the trauma victim. So the contagion effect is something that we all experience sometimes, where someone is sharing something about their life and it's a trauma that they've gone through, and maybe they're visibly upset. So then you can feel your own tears or your own, physical, emotional sense of sharing in that feeling. It's empathy personified. It's where you feel their pain but aren't able to distinguish between them and you. You both feel it. It's a contagious experience. The next one, this is vicarious traumatization. We hear a lot about vicarious trauma, and vicarious trauma is like the burnout that people feel. It's the compassion fatigue. An over-identification with trauma victims leads us to a sense of, numbness, that we no longer feel the compassion. We're too tired to feel it. And we almost have an apathy or not wanting to deal with these people anymore and their problems. We don't sound like ourselves anymore. This vicarious traumatization, this has happened to people. They're good people. Their intentions are still really good, and they can still do really good things. But they're the people that may appear to be biased that we work with. How did they get there? Well, they got there by not being aware of the impact of trauma on them. The next is secondary traumatic stress. And this is something that can happen when you're involved with someone who's sharing a trauma experience that's very significant. It's perhaps when someone is sharing that they have been exposed to a gunshot or a gun shooting rather, or something that is very serious, and it's a secondary acute trauma symptom where you're shaken, your sense of safety is shook up, and you don't have a sense of, when you go home, you're going to be looking over your shoulder to see if someone's following you. Now the next one, the countertransference, that one is a very, very common experience that we all have, especially in schools, because as professionals, we don't have the luxury of shutting the door. when somebody is a therapist, for example, they're in an office typically, and the student or the client comes in, they have their session, they leave. We don't have those doors. We're in classrooms, we're in hallways, we're in cafeterias, we're on the playgrounds. And what may happen is that students, because of your caring nature, may see in you something or some feeling that they're lacking in their lives. So you may be maternal. So they may see you as the nurturing figure that they need in their lives. You might become the aunt. If you're paternal, you might become the uncle figure for them, or the grandma or the grandfather figure for them, or the mother or the father figure for them. The counter transference, the transference that they have towards you, is that you are that person for them. And the counter transference would be is if you start calling them your kids, or you start acting as though you are indeed that person, that grandma figure or that mama figure or that father figure or grandpa figure. That is something that is common among us as educators, because we sometimes forget that we can't be all things to all these kids. So we talked about there were 4. There was the contagion effect, vicarious traumatization, secondary traumatic stress, and countertransference. And now we're going to talk about shared trauma experience. So in this one, this is one that we as a group have experienced if you've worked in Marysville for a period of time, because back in 2014, October 24th, there was a shooting at MP, and this was a shared trauma response. Many of us knew those involved. Some of you worked there, and it was a trauma that we went through together. Feeling loss, uncertainty, fear, and certainly vulnerability. Natural disasters of other kinds. This is a picture of the New Jersey shore after Hurricane Sandy. And this was October 29th, 2012. And Hurricane Sandy was a shared trauma response for people living on the East Coast. Many were affected. There was $70 billion worth of damage. There have been other disasters. This is one that's just a very visual one for me personally, having roots in New Jersey. And another shared trauma response is this coronavirus, because our own sense of safety, some of us have had loss. Certainly we've experienced loss with having to do education differently, but also bringing up lots of feeling of vulnerability and safety concerns. These are all examples of trauma responses. Now, back to self-care. So, strategies to avoid burnout, exhaustion, by doing self-care. The first is you need to be self-aware. You need to recognize changes in yourself. What are those changes? They could be perceptions of safety. Maybe you're not feeling safe as you had in the past in different situations. Your feelings of self-esteem. Maybe you're questioning yourself more. Are you having changes in close relationships? Are people that you're close to, friends and family, are they looking at you differently? Are they asking you what's going on? You might even hear yourself. I remember being out for dinner and I was abrupt with the waitstaff, and it's just not me. And my friends and my husband looked at me, and one friend said, "What's going on?" And that was really helpful. It was like a jump start to be self-aware. I'm having a hard time. Are you having trust issues, changes in trust issues with your peers or with your administrative staff? And is there a feeling that you may be experiencing that you're not in control? So your self-care strategy is to ask yourself, am I experiencing any of this? Now, that's one. Another very important piece, as we said earlier, with looking at yourself in relationship to your reactions, is looking at your own boundaries. Are you over or underreacting to behavior and events? Remember countertransference that we talked about for a minute? If you're having some countertransference, if it's a sign that you're having that, if you are starting to react to a student in a very personal way. So for example, if a student is having unexpected behavior and where you're typically neutral and helping the student work through that, instead you take it personally as if it's an affront to you that they're having a hard time. How you would know that is if you can feel emotion as you react to that student. So in order to get your perspective taking to be in gear, you need to do something about that. And sometimes it may be talking to your team, to people you work with. It could be talking to the building counselor if you have a relationship with them, and that's a really good resource for you. Talking to your supervisor or administrator is also helpful. But talking to somebody who you don't feel judged by, who you can be neutral with, and who can help you see what may be happening. And then the other piece is to check in on your basic needs and to say to yourself, are my needs being met outside of this workplace that is only one facet of my life? So let's look at that. So self-care is being self-aware with your basic needs. And this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in here, in this triangle, there's the basic needs, your psychological needs, and your self-fulfillment needs, and they build on each other. Now, your basic needs, your physiological needs are so important, just like they are for the kids we work with, they are for you. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating well? Are your housing and home needs, are all of those physical needs taken care of? Then we look at our safety needs. Are you feeling safe and secure in your life, in outside of work, as well as at work? Then moving into the psychological needs, that sense of belongingness. Do you have a support system? Are your needs being met in that way? Are you making room for you to laugh with friends, to go on dates with your partner? How about your esteem needs? Do you have a feeling of accomplishment in your work and in your life? And finally, that self-fulfillment, that self-actualization, that's where you need to be looking at fulfilling your own potential and making sure that that is happening for you. It's a lot. So, daily practice. This is where I'm going to have to get another one of my little books that I have for you. And first, a very important one is movement breaks. We talk about the need to be aware of that with our students. We need to be aware of that with yourself as well. So you need to be looking at, getting up throughout the day, moving around, getting the oxygen going in your body, into your brain. You want to wash your hands often. It's really great to do that in between tasks. Why? Yes, we have a virus right now, and yes, we're trying to be very, very careful about germs and being safe, not transmitting germs to each other. But it's more than that. When you wash your hands, it's like you're letting go of your old stuff and you're fresh for the new stuff. It's really a sense of like waking up your body. Even splashing water on your face can help as well. Mindful sitting. So this is where I need to be looking at myself and where I am and making sure that I'm sitting straight in my chair, leaning back. I feel my feet on the floor. I breathe in deeply and I exhale. Mindful sitting is that. It's making sure that you are grounded, like your feet have roots, like the trees. Your floor is your ground, and you're getting grounded. You're leaning back, you're breathing, and you're doing that mindful breathing throughout the day. You might say, well, why is that so important? Well, here's my other book that I want to show you. And this was a book that's called Master of Mindfulness. And it's how to be your own superhero in times of stress. And it's written by a 5th grade class and their teacher in California. So this is really cute. It says, how does this all work? And I don't know if you can see, but there is a picture of the brain there. And with this, it talks about usually when you practice mindfulness, it makes you feel calm and relaxed. The reason for this is that you are connecting 4 different parts of your brain. Your prefrontal cortex, your limbic system, which includes the hippocampus and the amygdala, and the brainstem. Brain cells are called neurons, and there are almost 100 billion of them in our heads. When the neurons from the 4 parts of the brain touch each other, we feel good. It's easier to concentrate, be kind, and make good decisions. To achieve this connection, you are practicing breathing. You know you are breathing when you are breathing, and when you are angry, you recognize when you're angry. When you're happy, you know you're happy. So, basic stuff, simple explanation, breathing, it's easy. Another daily practice that's great to do doesn't require a book for me to reference. It's just finding humor with your peers. Not laughing at students, but laughing with each other about things that may happen. Being able to laugh at yourself even. And that really gets the cortisol in your brain going, and that's like the cuddle hormone. But it's really great because it does give you more energy. Smile. Smiling is contagious. When you smile at others, they smile back at you, and that mirrors like a really good feeling. It fills, when you smile, it fills their bucket, they smile back at you, it fills your bucket, everybody feels a bit better. And then the other piece here is a daily practice is to look for small accomplishments. Don't set your goal so high. In order to achieve a feeling of satisfaction, you have to set very small goals, things that you can accomplish, and then build on that. Of course, there's long-term self-care, and this is really key, where you need to have balance. You want to develop and maintain good balance between your personal and your professional life. Well, many of us live and work in the same community. And a story that I have on that is, many years ago, I worked with a family with a parent with a few kids, and it ended up that she had lots of needs, and the kids did too. And one of her kids ended up being on one of my kids' soccer team. Now, I had clear boundaries. I made sure that I did not talk with her about her work with me when we were on the soccer field. And we talked about that. We talked about that role differentiation. If I had blurred those boundaries, I wouldn't have been effective with her as a counselor. I would have worked with her more as a friend, and clearly, I would have been exhausted. We would have had a lot of those issues that we talked about earlier. We would have had more of that contagion effect, and certainly would have had transference and countertransference issues. So, boundaries, having balance, developing and maintaining your personal and professional life. As a long-term self-care practice, you need to maintain positive connections with friends and family. Make room for that. Schedule it. Make sure you're getting your needs met, family first, always. And make sure you're connecting with friends as well. So important. Having regular exercise routines. Everybody does it differently. Maybe you're a runner. Maybe you're a walker. Whatever you do, just do something. Find something that meets your needs. Tailor it to your daily schedule. You want to maintain and first create, then maintain healthy outlets. This is where you might have a hobby. I just listed a few up there. What do you like to do? It has to be your habit. Some people have very involved things that they like to do. Some people go, do woodworking or a fancy craft. Some people are very skilled in that, artsy part of their brain, that right side of their brain. Some of us are more literal and like to read. But whatever it is, it should be something that makes you feel recharged and helps with that self-actualization that we talk about. And that also is part of that seeking out enrichment activities. That could be a class that you're taking. It could be going back to school. It doesn't have to be going back to school. It could be just learning something new, having a growth mindset about something that you can take on. For me, learning how to do this was an enrichment activity, learning how to do Screencastify. Now, be mindful of the benefits of all this. This is why we do this work. We came to this work because we care, right? We have compassion. And in order to have compassion, we need to take care of ourselves. You can't meet the needs of others without meeting the needs of yourself first. So, compassion satisfaction takes place when you, as a professional, have been able to do the self-care that's needed while working with victims of trauma and are able, as a result, you're able to have a sense of accomplishment. Now, before I end, I do want to just share one thing from Laura Vandernoot Lipsky's writing. And she wrote this, which I think is really beautiful. And it's really key in that it talks about yourself, the other, and the we. And it's a message for us as individuals working with students of trauma, as well as for them and for us in this experience together. So here it goes. May I be free of suffering and the roots of suffering. May you be free of suffering and the roots of suffering. And may we be free of suffering and the roots of suffering. May I find peace and the roots of peace. May we find peace and the roots of peace. May I find joy and the roots of joy. May you find joy and the roots of joy. May we find joy and the roots of joy. May I find wellness and the roots of wellness. May you find wellness and the roots of wellness. And may we find wellness and the roots of wellness. May I be free. May you be free. May we be free.